And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
Why do you keep fighting this thing? It just doesn't make sense. They're going around playing you and laughing at you behind your back, Brad. Whether you know it or not, they're laughing at you. So tell me, Brad, what are we going to do? We won the election, and it's not fair to take it away from us like this. And it's going to be very costly in many ways. And I think you have to say that you're going to re-examine it, and you can re-examine it, but re-examine it with people that want to find answers, not people that don't want to find answers.
What we're saying is not at all what you're describing.
Okay.
And these are investigators from our office. These are investigators from GBI, and they're looking, and they're good, and that's not what they're seeing.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Declaring it a riot.
Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line!
42. We're about 5 miles out. We're trying to make our way through all this.
Breach of the Capitol to the upper level.
We need an area for the House members. They're all walking over now through the tunnels.
What I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I had seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, they had, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
We lost the line! We lost the line! All deputies, get back!
In fact, officers still remaining on the House floor, on the third floor, to use the subway themselves. It's time to evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
It was carnage, it was chaos, and that day it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat.
I too was being crushed by the rioters. I could feel myself losing oxygen and recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die.
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
How did we get here?
Crime is down in America. Violent crime is down. The economy is ticking up.
It is not down in the biggest cities.
Violent crime murder rate is down.
Then how come it's up in Chicago, up in Baltimore, and up in Washington?
There are pockets where certainly we have not tackled
your national
murder
capital, your third biggest city.
But violent crime across the country is down. We're not under siege in the way that we were in, say, the 80s.
The average American, looking at Dallas policemen, and look at the list of states he listed. The average American, I will bet you this morning, does not think crime is down, does not think they are safer.
But it is. We are safer, and it is down.
No, that's your view.
Those are facts.
I just told no.
These are the national FBI facts.
But what I said is also what I said is also a fact.
But hold on, Mr. Speaker, because you're saying liberals use these numbers, they use this sort of magic math. This is the FBI statistics. They're not a liberal organization.
No,
they're a crime
but what I said is
organization.
equally true. People feel more threatened.
Yes, they feel it, but the facts don't support it.
As a political candidate, I'll go with how people feel, and I'll let you go with the theoreticians.
When I was a kid in the 1980s, my parents had our local newspaper, which was the Washington Post, delivered to our front doorstep every single morning. And I vividly remember my dad. He'd get home from work after a long day on the job, plop down at the kitchen table, and he'd read that paper every single day. In the evenings after dinner, my parents would relax, sit on the couch, watch like maybe 20 minutes of the local news, and that was it. That's all the news that we got. They didn't watch cable news, there was no internet, no social media. Everybody we knew had the same exact media diet. Read the local paper, watch the local news or one of the 3 major networks, and that was it. And we all had a very similar understanding of the news of the day.
One last thought on shopping as you recover from the blitz of today. After Christmas sales begin the day after tomorrow, and you'll probably wish you'd waited when the prices were a little bit lower.
Now, obviously, since that time, things have changed dramatically. You've had the rise of talk radio, where many shows are specifically designed to give their listeners really partisan takes on the news of the day. Over the same time period, you had the emergence of cable news, which also describes the world in really ideologically biased ways. And then, of course, you have the internet, where no matter how wrong you are, you can find somebody to tell you you're right.
You've got mail.
And what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage. Companies are there. The latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
Yeah, but it's easy to criticize something you don't fully understand, which is my position here.
Go ahead.
But I can remember a couple of months ago, there was like a big breakthrough announcement that on the internet or on some computer deal, they were going to broadcast a baseball game. You could listen to a baseball game on your computer. And I just thought to myself, does radio ring a bell?
These massive changes to our information ecosystem have no doubt benefited American society in many ways. But they've also created a number of problems that we have to figure out how to solve.
In the last few years, we've seen such shocking departures of reality. And we can point fingers at both sides. Maybe I shouldn't do it on this call, but just, for example, it certainly seems to me as though the president tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power. This is just unbelievable. And the fact that we don't all agree that this was shocking is unbelievable to me. And on the left, we have people a strong contingent that denies that biological sex is a reality, and we should therefore change a lot of our policies. And to the rest of us, wait, we're really tolerant about whether people want to, live as a different sex, but to say that there's no biology, this is just bizarre. And so, so both sides, you have this process of just flying away from reality towards extreme beliefs. All groups value the truth, okay? Every ideological group believes it values the truth. All groups hold something sacred. And if you hold something sacred, then as I've said, no trade-offs, no nuance. That means that your sacred values are going to conflict with the truth. And when that happens, all groups are the same. They throw truth under the bus and they go with their sacred values. And that's where we are.
Unfortunately, in the U.S. today, both liberals and conservatives are just bombarded every single day by low-quality information. Some of it's misinformation, so it's information that's false, but the people who are spreading it don't know that it's false. Some of it's disinformation, which the people who are spreading it know that it's false, and they're doing so to achieve a goal, whether it's political or otherwise. Some of it's malinformation, which is information that's true, but it's being used in a misleading way. And again, this is not a problem just of liberals or conservatives. Americans across the political spectrum are being bombarded every single day by low quality information. And the information is often coming from sources they think are trustworthy. They think they can trust them. And oftentimes these sources have credentials which should signal that they can be trusted, and yet they can't. And this is just poisoning our society. It is so corrosive to American society. Now, there are several examples that I could talk about, both left and right. On the right, there's the very well-known example of the 2020 election. Even years after the election took place, many Republicans truly believed that the election was stolen, even though it wasn't. And they were being told this by people they trusted. Many of those people had credentials which should signal they knew what they were talking about and they were being factual, and they weren't. There are several examples on the left as well. In certain progressive circles, for instance, you can really ruin your reputation, you can ruin your career if you question certain flawed narratives around a number of really sensitive topics, whether that's race, gender, or a number of other topics. Now, it didn't have to be this way. We live in an era of good information. This is the golden age of information. We have access to more high quality information today than ever before. That's not the problem. The problem is we also have really easy access to a lot of really low quality information. And so you have to be able to figure out which information is accurate and which information is misleading. And many Americans either don't have the skills to do it, they don't want to do it, or they become addicted to the low quality information.
Right now, if you walked into a library, you'd see books neatly arranged on shelves by subject matter. You could pick up the book, or if it's a magazine, pick up the magazine. You could look at the book jacket. You know who the author is. You know something about the author's background. You know who the publisher is. And best of all, there's the librarian. And the librarian can tell you, well, if you want to know something about, the minimum wage laws in the United States, this economist is really conservative, and he takes a negative point of view about the minimum wage. And if you're going to read him, you should read her because she's more liberal and she thinks the minimum wage is a good thing. Now imagine instead if you walked into a library and the only thing you saw were 1 trillion pieces of paper, single piece of paper just flying around in the air. And you reached up and you grabbed one and you started reading it. You wouldn't know who wrote it. You wouldn't know who's financing it. You wouldn't know anything about the credentials of whoever wrote it. You wouldn't know where it's coming from. You wouldn't know anything. And that is today's internet.
There are a lot of causes for this, and I identify 3 in the book that I wanted to talk about in particular. The role of higher education, which is supposed to at least cure some of this and is actually making it worse. The role of the media, which I think has I'll talk about that in a moment, but that the media has essentially become an entertainment complex rather than an information vehicle. And finally, the thing that everybody thinks is responsible for this, the internet. But I think it's very, very important to note, I don't blame the internet for the situation we live in now. I think the internet put all of this on steroids. I think it made it a lot worse. The media has segmented into echo chambers. What's interesting is the news no longer tells you what you need to know. It asks you what you want to hear. And it's all segmented by your particular taste.
When cable technology and satellite technology began to grow in the 1980s into the 1990s, that's when Rupert Murdoch, who is originally Australian, he was a media owner in New York, and he said, you know what? I think we can do on television what Rush Limbaugh has done on the radio. And so the first efforts toward building Fox News as a cable news channel began in 1994, and it launched in 1996. When this happened, it was the first time that anybody thought we are going to have a news channel that was purposely and specifically ideological.
There is absolutely no way to rig a national election. They are handled at the local level. So what's going to happen is they're going to have their recount, and then let's just hope they accept that Donald Trump was elected.
The big question is whether or not this is so widespread, and Brian, you used that word a moment ago, widespread, to overturn an entire election.
Somehow Donald Trump was not the duly elected president of the United States. This is all a distraction. In closer, particularly contentious races, Democrats, more so than Republicans, seem to have a problem conceding defeat.
We have demonstrable statistical and mathematical and computer evidence of hundreds of thousands of votes being injected into the computer systems repeatedly that simply don't pass muster. The Department of Justice and the FBI really need to get after it right now and investigate all the reports of fraud. There are hundreds of them.
Yeah, well, I hope Attorney General Barr is doing that.
Hillary Clinton's campaign said it is supporting recount efforts that are led by Green Party candidate Jill Stein. Now, this is insanity. It's all about trying to undermine a Democratic election and, of course, Donald Trump's decisive victory. Now, of course, they have no actual proof of voter fraud or any wrongdoing. Democrats, they just want to try and block any and all audit of what are now growing examples and, frankly, affidavits of ballot irregularities and outright illegality.
If there's every election that doesn't need a recount, it is this one. What about the arrogance of people saying the president can't get a recount or can't look into the allegations?
So lie to me. Lie to me, make me believe everything you say. Just lie, 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 lie. I'd rather have it that way. Because the truth would only hurt me, and that price is too big to pay. So lie to me. I'd rather have it that way. Now you may think I'm foolish for saying what I've said, but the truth could mean I'd lose you. So tell me a little lie instead. Tell me that you love me, and I'll believe every word you say.
It's very easy to push people into groups where they feel they're in the in-group and really demonize the people who are in the out-group. And so what we're seeing right now is a right-wing media circle that is self-reinforcing, very tightly closed, and while they compete with one another for viewers and clicks, they don't challenge one another in what is the truth. They stick to narratives that may or may not be true. The reason that so many people went to the Capitol was because they were convinced that an election was stolen when there was not one single court case. There was not one single shred of evidence that showed that it was. And if they believed so deeply in their hearts that they traveled from all around the country and they stormed the Capitol and they were ready to kill people in the name of righting a wrong that did not exist, then that right-wing media, that conservative ecosystem, has too much power. And that's one very important problem.
National left-wing media has undergone a fundamental transformation. They are gushing over President Biden.
You are, if I may say, everything is advertised as you ran for president. You're also one of the most loved and respected. I would say that also. In history.
Well, get ready. It's going to be 4 years of nauseating, gauzy coverage. The watchdogs, well, they're just lapdogs. Are you having fun in this job?
I am.
Is it?
I love it.
Look at the economy.
Take a look.
Are you getting the credit for this economic revival?
They continue to fawn over this guy like he's Jesus Christ.
The media, pretty vicious, not just to you, but to your family. How do you process that?
The answer to the question is mainstream media loves him. Right over there is your hotel.
Yeah, that's right. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful?
It's a beautiful hotel.
Real change in tune with a new leader in the White House. The pundits were not hiding their excitement.
When you were with the president of China, you're launching these military strikes. Right there, you're saying, a reminder, here's who the superpower in the world is. When did you tell him?
But I'll tell you.
Before dessert?
But I will tell you. Only because you've treated me so good for so long, I have to tell you, right?
He's used to the media asking him easy questions.
We want to get to Kanye West. He tweeted that he loves you, that you're his brother, and
he's got good taste.
The left goes ballistic. What's your reaction?
Yeah. The tingling sensation up and down the media mob's legs, well, they are throbbing like never before.
Promises made, promises kept. Mr. President, thank you.
Will he keep Donald Trump's Air Force One color scheme change?
Those were just some of the hard-hitting questions the press threw at Jen Psaki this week, in a preview of what we should expect from the mainstream media over the next 4 years.
Given your ability, your successes, all of the things that you can talk about for 2 hours here, how are we going to get that across to the American people?
Wow, double standard much?
On the right, the problem as I see it is that many conservatives just don't trust, or they just flat out ignore, too many of the truly trustworthy and legitimate sources of information that are readily available to all Americans, like the Associated Press or Reuters, the gold standards of media outlets. And conservatives are placing too much trust and spend too much time consuming unreliable information from unreliable sources like Fox News and Newsmax. And this gives many conservatives a really distorted understanding of a number of really important societal issues that they care about. Now, liberals in America also consume a lot of misleading information about issues that they care about. Unfortunately, though, I think the source of this misleading information is a little bit different than what's happening on the right, and perhaps even harder to address. The problem, as I see it, is that many of the flawed assumptions on the left in America actually originate not in the partisan institutions themselves that are spreading the information, so the MSNBCs and the Voxes of the world, but actually starts earlier with the people who are producing the information in the first place. And oftentimes that's academic researchers. The problem has gotten much worse in recent years because academia has become even more liberally dominated than it was in the past. Now, academia has always had a leftward tilt, that's true, but some studies suggest it's gotten much worse. My own field of sociology, one estimate has that less than 3% of professors are conservative. In psychology, it's less than 6%. Some fields, some studies show, have no conservative professors at all. And this extreme imbalance is allowing bad research to make it into the public discourse. It's allowing flawed and biased research to become accepted knowledge on the left. And this is really helping to unleash misleading information on the left. Different way than it's happening on the right, but it's still happening around different issues, and it's happening to the left.
A lot of progressives and people on the left tend to think that misinformation is just a right-wing problem, but it isn't. You often hear in circles on the left things like, oh, those low information voters, if only those, confused, ignorant voters weren't out there casting their ballots, we would never have people like Trump elected. Well, misinformation is not just a problem on the right. There's lots of misinformation on the left. There's lots of misinformation circulating in progressive circles. And a really concerning one for me as an academic is in academic research, a place where you might least expect it. Gatekeepers in the world of academia, such as editors of journals, editors of presses, such as the peer review process itself, including the peer reviewers, are increasingly left-wing and even far left-wing. So there's a kind of ideological monoculture taking over among the gatekeepers in academia who are checking the information that's being published and disseminated for accuracy. And whenever you have an ideological monoculture, like that, there's the danger of blind spots. So lots of commonly held beliefs and lots of commonly held theses in academia are either wrong or have weak to non-existent empirical support. One area that in the last 4 years has been especially salient and where we've really seen a lot of misinformation on the left is the true extent or the true numbers at which police are killing Black Americans. Now, anytime an agent of the state kills a citizen, it's extremely concerning, and it's something that we should try to minimize absolutely as much as possible so that it doesn't happen. But there is this misperception on the left, and this has been demonstrated with empirical studies. There's a misperception on the left that the police are just out hunting Black people and having a kind of field day of just target practice and shooting for sport Black people, and that's simply wrong. There are all sorts of very careful studies that do show that or suggest that although Black people are killed at disproportionate rates, they are killed in, relative to their percentage of the population, they're killed at greater rates than white people and Hispanics, even though about half of all people killed by police are white. Black people are nonetheless disproportionately killed. And the question is why? And really, a lot of the best research on the topic suggests that it's not because of some sort of bias on the part of police. So that is an area where people on the left, despite careful academic research, have a sort of misapprehension that the police are killing. Sometimes people will say hundreds, sometimes they'll say thousands of unarmed Black people every year. And that's just not true. And this is an area where the more conservative you are, the more well-informed you seem to be, according to the surveys that have been done on this topic. Another hot button issue is microaggressions. Now, if you talk to some people on the left, and if you read some of the scholarship that's been done on microaggressions, you get the feeling that they absolutely pervade the life of racial and ethnic minorities, of women, of people with, sexual orientations that are not sort of heteronormative, of people who are not, just straight males, people who have disabilities. But actually, the research on this is really weak. One example is saying we've been told in the research, and if you were to go to any college campus sort of DEI office, you would be told that saying something like America is a land of opportunity is a microaggression. Now, it turns out that when you ask Black and Hispanic people whether they take that as a microaggression or whether they find anything offensive about it, is there anything about it that makes them sort of wince? It turns out that the vast majority, and the numbers are the high 80s into the 90s, percent, say, well, no, why would it bother me to hear someone say that America is the land of opportunity? That's not an insult to me somehow. So this is the state of the microaggression research. And again, this is ubiquitous language, this talk of microaggressions that's causing harm. I would say this is yet another area where people on the left are operating under a misapprehension. They have, they've received some misinformation and they've run with it.
Right now, the scientific publishing industry is going through what's being called a replication or reproducibility crisis. Researchers are repeating earlier studies trying to reproduce the experiments as closely as possible. One group might publish findings that look promising, and other groups might use those results to develop their own experiments. But if the original study was wrong, that's a whole lot of time and money right down the drain. In theory, these repeat studies should be finding the same results. In 2012, a researcher named Glenn Begley published a commentary in the journal Nature. He said that during his decade as the head of cancer research for Amgen, an American pharmaceutical company, he'd tried to reproduce the results of 53 so-called landmark cancer studies. But his team wasn't able to replicate 47 of those 53 studies. That means that 88% of these really important cancer studies couldn't be reproduced. Then, in August 2015, a psychologist named Brian Nosek published another paper, this time in the journal Science. Over the course of the previous 3 years, he said, he'd organized repeats of 100 psychological studies. 97 of the original experiments had reported statistically significant results. That is, results that were most likely caused by variables in the experiment and not some coincidence. When his team tried to reproduce those results, they only got 36 significant results, barely a third of what the original studies had found. For example, Begley, the biologist who led the cancer replication studies at Amgen, tried an experiment 50 times and hadn't been able to reproduce the original results. The lead researcher on the original study told Begley that his team had tried the experiments 6 times and gotten positive results once. And that's the one they published.
So a lot of really sloppy and flawed and sometimes just wrong research findings are making their way into academic journals. They're being published by academic book presses. And then it makes its way into the public discourse where people on the left assume that it's established knowledge because people who should know better, the so-called experts, are vouching for it and are saying, yes, this is solid research. We've done a good job here. We've established this as a fact, and you can trust it. So a lot of people on the left who are spreading this kind of misleading information don't actually know they're doing it because, again, it's been vouched for by experts. And there's a whole host of reasons why this is happening, but one of the biggest reasons is there's just not a lot of intellectual diversity in academia anymore. The guardrails, the referees, the people who should be checking this research to see that it's high quality, oftentimes they just share the same exact biases as the researchers themselves, the same blind spots, the same view of the world. And so they're not as likely as they would have been in the past when they had different perspectives and different blind spots and different biases, not as likely to catch bad research that is ideologically flawed or partisan in some way. Now, unfortunately, at the same time that all of this has been happening, we've also seen a rise in whether you want to call it cancel culture or call-out culture, but people, when they ask honest, legitimate, good faith questions of what they see as flawed research, being attacked and having their reputations and their careers sometimes pretty severely harmed. A good example of this comes from the Harvard economist Roland Fryer. He conducted research into whether there was racial bias in the use of lethal force by police in the US. And what he found was when it came to non-lethal force, police putting their hands on you, police sort of pushing you up against a car or roughing you up during the course of an arrest, he did find that there was racial bias in that non-lethal use of force. But when it came to lethal force, he did not find that there was racial bias. And he faced some serious consequences for publishing that study.
And so through these experiences, long story short, I collected a lot of data. And those experiences helped me understand what types of data to collect. We collected millions of observations on everyday use of force that wasn't lethal. We collected thousands of observations on lethal force. And the key question, I alluded to it earlier in a bit of a joke, but the key question is not just this arbitrary, silly snapshots that some journalists, not named Barry, do a lot, which is black people are 13% of the population and they are 50% of the police shootings. I'm sorry about that, but I don't know what that has to do with the question. Right? And it was in this moment in 2016 that I realized people lose their minds when they don't like the result. Right? And so what my paper showed, you'll see tomorrow, like some of you, was that, yes, we saw some bias in the low-level uses of force, every day pushing up against cars and things like that. People tend to like that result. But we didn't find any racial bias in police shootings. Now, that was really surprising to me because I expected to see it. The little-known fact is I had 8 full-time RAs that it took to do this over nearly a year. When I found the surprising result, I hired 8 fresh ones and redid it to make sure. They came up with the same exact answer, and I thought it was robust. And then I went to go give it, and my God, all hell broke loose. It was a 104-page, dense, academic economics paper with a 150-page appendix, okay? It was posted for 4 minutes when I got my first email. This is full of shit. Doesn't make any sense. And I wrote back, how'd you read it that fast? That's amazing. You are a genius. And I had colleagues take me to the side and say, don't publish this. You'll ruin your career. I said, what are you talking about? I said, what's wrong with it? Do you believe the first part? Yes. Do you believe the second part? Well, the issue is they just don't fit together. We like the first one, but you should publish the second one another time. I said, let me ask this. If the second part about the police shootings, this is a literal conversation. I said to them, if the second part showed bias, do you think I should publish it then? And they said, yeah, then it would make sense. And I said, I guarantee you I'll publish it. We'll see what happens. So it was, you know, I lived under police protection for about 30 or 40 days. I was going to the grocery store to get diapers with an armed guard. It was crazy.
So what's called now cancel culture, keeping out speakers you don't like, imposing an environment in which people feel uneasy to talk freely and so on, all of that should not be tolerated. That's taking over what has been the standard for a great many years, and it shouldn't be done. The Harper's letter was a completely anodyne statement saying that it's a mistake to join the right wing by imposing things like banning talks, breaking up talks, setting up an environment in which people are free to say things and so on. One of the consequences of this letter, which was interesting, was a stream of letters I'm getting from mostly young left academics describing to me their own experiences in having to walk on tiptoe on eggshells because of the toxic atmosphere that's been created.
absolutely still.
There's this really well-known scene in the movie Jurassic Park that I think most people probably remember, where the T-Rex escapes his enclosure, he eats one person and terrorizes several more. Now, just minutes before he does that, he's perfectly harmless. When the security systems were not deactivated, when they were on and they were working properly. Now, it may not seem like it, but I think this is a pretty good metaphor for what's been happening in recent years in the US when it comes to misinformation and disinformation. There's a lot of really strong research which suggests that our human brains are hardwired to look for and accept information that we agree with, even if it isn't true, reject information and avoid information that we disagree with, even if it's factual, and interpret information in a way that makes us feel right and smart and makes us and the people we care about look as good as possible. Now, all of our brains work this way. They all have these cognitive biases. I don't care if you're liberal or conservative, young or old, rich or poor, black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. And these cognitive biases are really only dangerous when we surround ourselves with low quality sources of information. And unfortunately, that's exactly what too many Americans have been doing in recent years. We're surrounding ourselves with low quality sources of information, and this deactivates the security systems in our brains and unleashes our cognitive biases to totally distort our understanding of reality. And the best safeguard against this is to surround ourselves with high quality information.
Social media platforms should continue and strengthen their efforts to stop the spread of misleading information. We could try to better regulate media, but Americans might not want this, and there are thorny legal and constitutional challenges. And there is a very real danger of both political parties abusing such power when they are in office. When it comes to academia, we need much more viewpoint diversity. The peer review process must be made more rigorous. Replication and retraction should be more common. We could increase transparency by making much more information publicly available, like research data, peer review reports, and the abstracts of studies that journals reject. At least in the short term, however, Americans are going to have to defend themselves. Organizations like NewsGuard, Ad Fontes Media, All Sides, and the Connors Institute publish ratings of all major media outlets in America. You can find out whether an information source is reliable in just a few minutes online. It's easy, and it's worth it. With all the high-quality sources out there, there is no need to rely on low-quality sources.
We could all focus a lot more on having intellectual humility, knowing the limits of our own knowledge, and valuing being right over feeling right. We can't keep locking ourselves in bubbles of only people that we agree with. Everybody has blind spots in their knowledge, and we won't identify ours if we only look for information that we know we will agree with. Finding out you were wrong sometimes isn't necessarily bad. It means that you're learning. Being smarter today than you were yesterday, in my opinion, is a sign of strength, not weakness. We should honestly engage with the strongest arguments of those we disagree with, and consider all the evidence, not just the stuff that we like. Ignore information sources that are constantly peddling outrage. Don't visit partisan websites, and turn off cable news. Above all, value the truth, tell the truth, and reward those who do the same.
Mr. President, today was heartbreaking, and I was shaken to the core as I thought about the people I met in China and Russia and Afghanistan and Iraq and other places who yearn for freedom and who look to this building and these shores as a place of hope. And I saw the images being broadcast around the world, and it breaks my heart. I have 25 grandchildren. Many of them were watching TV, thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. I knew I was okay. I must tell you as well, I was proud to serve with these men and women. This is an extraordinary group of people. I'm proud to be a member of the United States Senate and meet with people of integrity as we do here today. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. Fairly or not, they'll be remembered for their role in this shameful episode in American history. That will be their legacy. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I asked my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.